but now they're back. Hey guys, we're just waiting on Grayson to throw on a gi and then we'll get started. I guess I'll say a little something about what we're going to talk about today. So the concept for today is conversions. And conversions mean any situation in which I am advancing a strategy or a plan, or even if I'm just playing jiu-jitsu in a non-competition setting, and I have an idea in mind of something that I'd like to execute. First of all, as Steinbeck reminds us, the best laid plans of mice and men often go astray, or it might be awry. I forget the quote. It's either awry, A-W-R-Y, or astray. In any event, there's a lot of sayings like this in ancient wisdom cultures and contemporary American literature and all over the place about making a plan, having something in mind, creating an intent, and then factors interfere that prevent you from reaching the goal. So in some instances, we have a plan to do something when we're in a training session or in a competition. And when we are executing on that plan and the plan falls apart, if we don't have an ancillary plan or a supporting plan or a number of other options, we end up stuck in the failure of the plan itself. It's not necessarily our failure, it's just the failure of the plan to work the way we imagined it would. Another popular saying is man makes his plans and God laughs, right? So if we have a line of approach, and we'll call that line A, and in moving through line A, something interferes and knocks us off that course, if we don't have some additional options lined up, like B, option C, option D, etc., then we have nowhere to go, and we end up struggling very hard attached to line A. And what happens is, because we failed to, or because line A failed to execute itself as we intended it to, we end up in this unnecessary struggle that is really beyond our control, and then we end up resorting to things like power or strength or energy wasting movements that don't really do anything other than resolve the plan. That don't do anything to resolve the plan. So one example is, like, if you're in an argument with somebody and the argument is getting very intense and it's escalating and escalating and escalating, that kind of conflict is only fed the louder the people yell at one another. Next thing you know, the knives are out and somebody's getting cut. If, however, one of the two parties decides to have an alternative plan which involves de-escalation, and that person introduces a new approach to the conflict, that allows for resolution. So the conversion in jiu-jitsu is really a form of conflict resolution, where you're still advancing your superiority in the conflict, but you're refusing to remain single-pointedly focused on the element of your execution that has failed, okay? This can happen anywhere, and so what we'll do is just talk about a few techniques that offer examples of this. One example would be, and this is a very classic example, if you've been training for even just a few weeks, you will likely have seen an arm lock from the bottom guard position and a triangle choke from the bottom guard position. And it turns out that these two movements are related to one another intimately, not because of what they are, but because of the concepts that inform the structure or the shapes that allow them to reach their conclusion. So this is Grayson, by the way, everyone. Grayson is in my guard, and I close the guard, and Grayson may make the mistake of touching my chest and leaving his arms connected, and you see how he bends his shoulders, and because his posture is broken, it makes it realistic for me to hold on to one of his wrists. Now, I don't have to grab it tightly, And I do recommend you go under the opposite side wrist, just to not have to deal with the pressure if he flexes that arm up to push me off, right? So I attack this arm only. I can cup the wrist, and then I hold the back of the tricep so he can't pull the arm out. This covers the top half of the arm, the bottom half of the arm. And then when I place the foot in the hip, if I leave the knee open, this is dangerous. So I block the arm and contain the arm this way. And as I spin around the corner for the arm lock, right? Grayson realizes this is coming. Maybe even before I finish the execution, he rips the arm out. Okay, so now if you look what's happening here, I've got no attack. When the arm is gone, all that's left behind is this empty space. So now the question is, if this is the shape of my body in relationship to him, both legs placed horizontally across his back, one controlling his head, one controlling his midsection, and the only thing remaining behind is this arm, what can this shape fulfill? At this point, the shape can't fulfill anything unless I convert my position to something to allow for another optional achievement. So, one of the mistakes you see early practitioners making is thinking that anytime any arm is between any leg, you can grab it and arch the back and lift the hips and break the arm. But in this instance, that only works if the far side arm is caught in between, because the far side arm is the one that's contained on all sides. It's also the one that I've turned thumb to the sky, you see? Whereas when that arm disappears, this arm, you can see the thumb is down, and it makes it very hard to break. Now you could say, well, what if you turn the thumb up? No, because even here, I haven't contained the arm on all sides. And it's easier for Grayson to just hold my leg and guard against the arm. So now this shape, this initial attempt at the straight arm lock has failed. So what are some ways that I can convert my body with the minimal movement necessary to advance the strategy into the next best dominant position, right? One thing to do is just return to the place we came from. So we started in the straight arm lock position because the person gave us the hand. And when we converted, by the way, everything is a conversion in some sense, when we converted the closed guard into an open guard, which we then used to pivot and attack the arm, that was a conversion. But now the arm disappears, so I have to make another conversion. So I'll hold the arm in front of me just to slow down his escape. He might be trying to run away, so I'll keep him close. And instead of trying to fight for or against this arm, I'll simply take my leg that I passed over the head and put it back on the other side of the head. And when I do this, I need to now spin my head back to the center where I initially was. And I'll just close my legs again, crossing my feet again. Now, what you'll recognize here is something that looks like the beginning of a triangle choke from the bottom guard position. Really, all I've done is reclose my guard. I've closed my guard over one shoulder and under the opposite shoulder. This leg was already present. This leg went to a new position, but not too much different from the original position. The only difference is that before, I was under his shoulder, and now, because he pulled the arm away, I'm over the shoulder. So you can see how from this position, I've created a scenario in which a triangle choke attack may be possible, right? That would be the next logical conclusion. Now, if, for example, in the course of me attempting to execute the triangle choke, I'm going to do the same posture in the hip and the same attachment to the arm and the same stretching and pivoting, and the goal is to bring the person close and hide this foot behind the knee and then squeeze the knees together while I pull the head, right? If I can get all the way to the end of that attempt, we'll call that option B, because option A was the arm lock. If I can get all the way to the end of that attempt, that's fantastic. But if the person was savvy enough to extract their arm from the initial straight arm lock attempt. Right, there he goes. They probably also understand there's a relationship between the arm lock and the triangle, which means that as I now activate the triangle attempt by converting to the setup, they're going to set up tall and make it difficult for me to reach them. You see, he's too far away now. And unless I break his posture back down and bring him closer to me and get his head to dip below the horizon and get his shoulders to round so that the spine is curved instead of straight, it's now a struggle and another fight. So here's another place where my plan got interrupted, and I can resort to power and do everything I can to try to pull the person close, or I can convert to yet another position. So what are some positions that I can convert to from a failed triangle setup? Well, this arm is still in play, just like it was when he extracted the arm lock, just like it was now when he's sitting, just like it remains while he's sitting up defending the triangle. So another option would be to spin back to where I came from. Notice how I started in the center, I spun over here, I spun back to the center, and now because the center's not working out, I'm gonna go back to the other side again. This time I'm going to keep the arm with me, and I'll stretch this leg. Instead of this leg stretching to the sky to go across the neck, I'll stretch this leg to the sky to go behind the shoulder. Right, and here we convert into what is known as an omoplata submission. This is a bent arm lock. It's essentially a Kimura with your legs. You see? Now, here's the thing to understand. We're not talking about learning a series of techniques that you chain together. The purpose of this is not to say, hey, everyone should go for the straight arm lock, and when the straight arm lock fails, you should go for the triangle, and when the triangle fails, you should go for the omoplata. That's not what I'm saying. And if you think that's what's being said, you've misunderstood the point. The point is, you have an initial plan, an initial line of attack. When you're moving through that line of attack, or even just line of advancement, it doesn't have to be an attack. It could be a line of defense. Either way, in any event, when you're progressing on a path that you've determined and something intervenes or an obstacle shows up on that path, trying to fight your way through that obstacle is going to result in whoever has more power coming out on top. If the obstacle is stronger than your intent or than your plan is going to fail. If you're stronger than the obstacle, you may make it over, but at what cost? What do you sacrifice in surmounting the obstacle using base things like power and burning out energy, right? So rather than get stuck in this kind of tete-a-tete conflict, the option here is to say, well, I've got this plan, I'm executing on this line, the obstacle comes, and now I'm going to change my plan and figure out a way to get around this obstacle and create something new. Okay, those actually look like I'm Steven Seagal over here with all my Aikido hand movements. I'm trying to create visuals. The example we used of that is to begin in a straight arm lock. Right, the example we used is option A is a straight arm lock attack. When that disappears because he extracts, I transition to a triangle setup. And when that fails because he sits up, yet another obstacle, I now transition to a bent arm lock. Okay? So those are just some examples of how we can convert positions into alternatives that are feasible. And this is almost an endless game, because we could start, for example, from the bent arm lock position, from the omoplata position. And I could say now when Grayson defends this position, and what we're really saying there is when he interferes with my plans, what's my alternative? Notice, though, that all of the alternatives we created, they end in a potential submission, but in order to effect that submission, we must establish an appropriate position. So the appropriate position for the straight arm lock example that we gave was containing the person between our legs and the closed guard. The appropriate position for the triangle choke that we demonstrated was containing the person between my legs in the closed guard. The only difference is one leg is over the shoulder instead of both legs under the shoulder. So we have one over, one under. Same thing if Grayson's behind me and I ask him to put a seatbelt grip on me, over my shoulder, under my other shoulder. Look at his hands, right? This is the same thing that your legs do in the triangle setup. One is over and one is under. When you're doing this from the guard, you're doing it from the bottom facing up. Here, Grayson's doing it from an equal position, and he could do it from other positions. The point is, this control of entanglement is setting up all of his attacks, right? So the same thing, in the bent arm lock position, what am I doing when the triangle fails because of Grayson's posture and base? I'm converting back to a closed guard position where I'm entangling the person, and this time the focus is on one shoulder instead of two. So all of these things require a positional transition or a conversion to a new position with as minimal movement as possible. The larger your range of motion, the longer the line of attack, the more potential for error and interference there is, right? If I'm traveling from point A to point B and it's only one click, then perhaps there's only 3 to 4 things that could intervene on the way. But if I'm traveling from point A to point B and it's 50 clicks, 25 clicks, now there's an exponentially increased opportunity for interference, and that means more risk management, more risk assessment has to be taken into account. So jiu-jitsu is the same way. It's a journey. You're on the path, you have an intent, you're moving through, and when the obstacle occurs, rather than fight the obstacle, convert into something alternative. Here's another option, right? A little more sophisticated. Sometimes Grayson is in the guard position, and when I look for the straight arm lock, I do that because the person's given me the arm. Right? The last thing I want to do is reach out for the arm and pull it. When I do this, Grayson, what are you going to do? Yeah. And Grayson, by the way, is a judo black belt. He's one of our judo coaches here. So he's not new to grappling. You'll see just watching him demonstrate and being a partner with me is a very ideal scenario because you've got someone experienced who can behave appropriately as opposed to guessing along the way. So understand too, when you're training with somebody, if you have an experienced person that you're practicing moves on, take advantage of that person's experience to grow your own knowledge. It's never just that the person who's executing is the only one active. Both parties should be active at all times. And this is a great example coming from the world of expertise and training that helps you grow in ways that you might have limited yourself from or excluded yourself from doing because you remain inactive for your partner. So be an active partner. Don't kill each other, but be an active partner. So Grayson demonstrated what the natural response would be to reach in and grab. However, if he gives me the arm, because he puts it too deep, now I can contain the arm, right? Now, previously I had reached across my body with the opposite hand to lock down his wrist by draping it over his wrist, draping it over his forearm. And my second hand went to the tricep, and then that was all backed up by the foot in the hip and the pinched knee, right? See that containment there? See his shoulders coming together. Now, because I'm looking to do a more sophisticated version of the arm lock, it's more about the rotational movement than it is about the containment. I'm going to rotate first and catch later. So now I'm just going to catch on the same side, and my hand it can go to one of two places. If I'm focused exclusively on rotation, my hand can go to the mat, and palm up, it'll shoot under his leg, right? It'll shoot under his leg, and I'll just open my legs and spin and jump and catch, okay? That's a quick attack. It comes from a more open concept space. Perhaps Kim would be willing to talk to us about how this might apply to new urbanism. In any event, jiu-jitsu has its own architecture, and what we're building here is an open concept plan instead of a closed concept plan. So that's an attempt that may work, but if that attempt fails, because Grayson does the same thing, he'll just take the arm away. Right, yeah. Now it's a problem, you see. Now, because I spun the rotation actually put me a lot farther away than it did when I went slowly and stayed connected. So here's the problem. Getting back to the triangle now, see how far away he is? Getting back to the triangle is now difficult. I can take my leg and put it over his head on the far side. But in the meantime, I'm so far away that it makes it easy for him to smash the legs, right? He can just tilt my legs this way and duck under, and then he can secure a top position easily. So rather than look for a conversion that's out of range, now it makes sense, after failing at this attempt, to just get what's right in front of me. So this is where we would skip the triangle setup and immediately just attach ourselves to the arm in front of us and look to see what we can do here. And now, because that open concept failed, maybe I'll convert my style of attack now to something a lot more closed. So now, for example, to help finish the bent arm lock, I would hold the belt. Or I can go under the leg and hold the foot like this and keep it close to my ear. And the goal is now to stay very close to him and put a drag on his body and stretch him out. You see, so he falls, and that's when I can start executing my way through the arm lock. So there's a sort of more subtle conversion within the midst of a more sophisticated attack. Another option here would be that instead of going under the leg, and Randy, I see you watching, you'll remember this from the garage up in Wind Gap back in the day, right? We'll have an arm lock attack happening, and instead of going under the leg, I'll actually have one hand on the wrist and one hand in the collar. And the goal of the hand on the collar is to keep the posture broken down. So now look, again, if I pull very hard, Grayson's back is stronger than my arm, so he'll just sit up, right? And then he'll hold me down and he's got me stuck. If, however, I pinch my knees and pull him higher than the horizon, all I have to do is bring my elbow to my rib cage, and it's harder for him to sit up, or at least it slows his ascent, okay? So I'm looking to bury the hand in the collar, but when I do this, the breakdown happens because I use my legs to pull him close. You see how the head dips forward? Once the head dips forward and it's hovering here on this horizon, it's easy to just retract the elbow to the rib cage. Versus he sits up tall and I'm like, look, I mean, I could just climb the guy because he's got such a powerful position. So that's something to consider as well, right? This attempt here to pull a person down isn't working. I have to convert the position into something that doesn't just follow this powerful line of rope climbing. I have to tilt. Now they can move easily, right? So in this line here, the hand is already in the collar, and what may happen, again, now we're at sort of a level 3 of sophistication here, right? I start an initial attack on the collar, the person makes a base on my body and sits themselves away, which gives me the arm lock, you see? So now I follow my steps, I'm moving through the arm lock, and then he pulls the arm out anyway. And look, the hand stayed in the collar. The hand stayed in the collar. Now I want you to notice where the hand is. It's on the far side of the collar. That means that I've got one side of the carotid covered. What could I do to chop off the other side of the carotid? And you could say, well, you could take your leg off and put your hand there. But no, because the rest of his body is open now. You see, I've got one leg sort of touching his hip, but it's not really containing him. Again, my two arms from the bottom versus the power of his entire body from the top would be quite difficult. But my leg, which has already passed over the head and is resting against the carotid, that's a pretty good space filler. So what if in the attempt to do the arm lock, when the arm lock is extracted, when he saves his arm, I leave my leg where it is, and I just keep my hand on the collar, maybe give a little pull, and then stretch my leg, okay? What you'll see is this is a bottom-up version of an already very well-known choke. If Grayson is laying on his back with his head toward the camera, I might take my hand that's closest to his head and put it thumb down in the collar, and when my knuckles hit the ground, I'll rotate the forearm into the neck. the leg that's closest to the head now steps over the head, and I walk the foot until my heel or my Achilles goes against his neck. Now look what I've done. I've secured the carotid on this side and blocked, and I've secured the carotid on this side and blocked. Instead of using two arms like I normally would from the bottom or from the top, I've used one arm and one leg. And now to make the choke happen, I keep the arm, this arm, I keep the arm where it is. Once the leg touches, I lean forward a little bit to make the leg light, and then I stretch the leg. Okay, so I'm doing the same thing now from the bottom. We're in bottom guard position. We have an experienced player on top. So I'm not looking to immediately attack because the person is savvy to submissions. So we're going to go to a very classic approach, which is something that Elio always favored. In fact, back in the day when we competed, one of the rules was you had to have one hand on the sleeve, one hand on the collar. If you're playing bottom guard, you had to have that position. Kind of interesting. So we'll put one hand on the collar, palm up, try to curve around the back of the neck as deep as possible, and the second hand goes to the sleeve. You can hold this grip. I prefer to just drape the wrist or drape the forearm or cup the tricep. But in any event, I'm trying to pull him close and break him down. He's aware of this, so he converts now. He converts to a defensive position by straightening the arm, which gives me the arm lock. So now I convert my failed choke attempt, which he converted into a successful defense. I now convert that into an arm lock attack. And then he converts the successful defense by extracting the arm. And I leave the hand where it is, and I convert my already in place position to a choke. The same choke we just showed you from top down, side mount. Leaving the hand in the collar, I take the leg and I push the head away. Okay, super simple stuff. That's all Lay's phrase. Super simple! All right, super simple. So there are some examples of conversions, okay? Remember that the goal of the conversion is to recognize that the particular line of offense or defense or attack or positional advancement has failed to a certain extent. And rather than go head to head and butt heads in a power struggle within the conflict, I'm going to convert my position to something alternative. One more round here of all the conversions we discussed as examples. And again, walk away from this not thinking of this as a series of techniques. These are a series of interconnected principles. You can choose which techniques you would like to apply to the conversion process. Just understand that if you stick yourself in one place and are not willing to adapt and change, you will end up on the losing end of that battle. You have to be willing to adapt in real time. This is one of the things that makes jiu-jitsu so incredible. It allows for this real-time intellectual and physical adaptation in the heat of intensity of conflict. And it's about resolving that by understanding the principles on which it's based, not by going to the fanciest new detail. So remember, the first conversion happened because I was looking for a very classic arm lock attempt. And in the course of executing the classic arm lock attempt, my opponent ripped his arm out. So rather than fight to get the arm back, I simply take the leg that went to the far side, to the near side of the head here, and I put it back on the far side of the head. And notice how I've spun to this direction for the arm lock. So I'll spin back to the center and place him in what's called triangle setup, which means I've got one leg over and one leg under. This is a seatbelt grip with the legs from the bottom, one leg over, one leg under. And from here, if I become fortunate, I could start to execute a triangle, right? But in the course of my attempt to execute a triangle, Grayson, savvy opponent that he is, starts to create posture and prevent the triangle progression. So now I'm forced to convert again because I had plan A, which was the arm lock, that failed. I converted it into a triangle. That's my plan B. Now plan B has failed due to posture. So what makes the most sense here? I can fight to pull the head down just like I fight to hold onto the arm, both of which are low probability, Or I can look at what's in front of me and instead of fighting for posture, convert into a bent arm lock position and look for perhaps an omoplata submission. And again, this is not about the submission. This is about your ability to convert into a multitude of factors, a multitude of positions by responding to defensive factors in real time, okay? Then the second series we talked about was something a little more sophisticated. Rather than do this slower process where I put a lot of entanglements and obstacles in the way of an arm lock, sometimes the person gives me the arm a little too deep and I just drape the forearm and I open the legs, shoot the hand under the open thigh, and then just spin and jump to the arm lock right away. And in the course of this, he may pull the arm out. But now, because he's farther away, why is he farther away? Because my rotation catapulted me a greater distance from his body. It might be difficult to get the triangle because as I reach for it, he just smashes the legs down, ducks out the back. You see? That's an issue. Right, that's an issue. So now it doesn't make sense to look for the triangle as part of the conversion. The arm is gone. I just have to look at what's in front of me. What's in front of me is this arm. So I can keep the hand under the leg here, and I can attach the arm in front of me. Perhaps I can spin a little bit to the side and even start to roll him, right? I can start to roll him and reverse him in an omoplata sweep, or you can look for the original arm lock, the original bent arm lock. Now a third option, which is we're calling a level 3 sophistication option here, a more advanced option against someone who's extremely savvy, is to start out by attaching, and this is interestingly, for as advanced as it is, it's an extremely classical approach. Elio always taught us one hand on the collar, one hand on the sleeve. So now I'm trying to activate control here and break posture by pulling the knees close. And as I do, my goal is to maybe touch the other side of the neck so that I can finish the choke, but Grayson, being savvy, postures. And in posturing, he gives me the arm. So as I attack the arm, I get the leg out, and then he rips it clean. You see, he rips it clean. So now I still have the hand in the collar, and rather than fight to get the arm back or even go for the triangle here, my leg is already against the neck, and I can use this as the other half of a choke. When I extend my leg away, I get the same effect as the front choke. Okay? That'll do for today. So if you have questions or comments, go ahead and leave them for us. We look forward to seeing you next week. Stay tuned. Exciting announcements coming from the compound as to our forthcoming schedule, our reopening schedule, our reintegration plan. We have a lot of cool things happening in the very near future. Thanks to Grayson Zia, Judo Black Belt, and Jiu-Jitsu Playa Extraordinaire for hanging out and helping today. We'll see you guys soon.